this was all lies. And that's what made me then go into these other events. 9/11. Like, man, if I was lied to about this, I got to revisit 9/11. 9/11 for me was sacred for the longest time. I was a firefighter because of it. As someone that believed in science, I'm not saying I don't believe in science, but science has also become very dogmatic. You know, it comes off as something that is anti-religious, anti-dogma, and yet it does the same things that religious organizations do. You have to believe in these tenets or we will excommunicate you.
And Pontius Pilate famously says, "What is truth?" Do you believe you have a soul?
I don't know anymore, man. This is what pissed off my parents. Like, no, we have to accept the resurrection story. And they would get mad. And I'm just an inquisitive little kid, man. I was like 8, 9 years old. No, but he's God, right? You're telling me he's God. He knows everything.
And he claimed to be the Son of God. So we have to do something with that. You either have to believe him or you don't.
I want to try to be the best person that I can. I'm not perfect by any means, man. But I'm going to try to do things as best as I could so that if I go or if my brain goes at one point, people are like, hey, man, at least he was trying to be the best person that he could be.
You're listening to the Great Reassessment Podcast.
Are you tired of eating fiat food? Get your beef and pork today from Acme Acres in Spirit Lake, Idaho, where every cow is grass-fed, vaccine-free, and raised the way nature intended. My buddy Jason Hanley, he runs the place, and yeah, they even accept Bitcoin. Guys, I eat this meat, I feed it to my kids. It's amazing. You gotta try it. It's pure beef, no nonsense, shipped nationwide. Visit acmeacres.us today and taste what sound money should taste like. Hey everyone, I wanted to make a quick intro before we get into the actual show because I don't think I gave my guest a proper introduction while we were actually recording. So that's my bad, so I'll do that now. My guest today goes by the name of Weezy, and he is the host of the What is Truth podcast. Guys, you guys should check this show out, especially if you enjoyed today's conversation. He talks about conspiracies, and my personal favorite is his podcast on the Lincoln Assassination and alternate histories with that. He's got some great stuff on the moon landing, current events, given some pretty interesting takes. And so make sure to check it out. You guys will definitely enjoy it. Anyways, thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed the show. Well, thanks for taking the time to meet. I look forward to talking to you because I got introduced to your podcasts, I think probably about 6 months ago, and I've been tuning in pretty regularly, actually. And so I like what you do.
Appreciate it. How'd you find it, by the way?
So the first podcast I watched was your moon landing one with Randy Walsh.
Oh, okay.
And that was a good one. And then I just kind of went back into the archives and was listening to some of your episodes on Lincoln. And I was like, man, this is actually I'd never heard this before. I'd never heard any of this hypothesis that's actually backed up with a lot of there's so many holes in that story, man. So go ahead.
Yeah. No, I went to DC in April of last year. It was the 160-year anniversary. And I wanted to put my hypothesis to the test with top-notch people, people that work at Ford Theater Rangers. They were pissed. They couldn't rebut anything I said, but they didn't like that their narratives. See, a lot of people can't accept that they could be wrong, things that they've held dearly for so long. And so that's what made me laugh even more. They didn't rebut me. They just got mad. They just got angry.
What was some of the biggest?
Henry Rathbone repeating his deposition 3 times verbatim. Because I told him, I go, this sounds crazy, but I believe Henry Rathbone is the most likely shooter. Like, get out of here. This is insane. No one's ever said that. Then I started giving my pieces, the 3 depositions memorized. Then what he goes on to do later on in Germany, killing his wife, self-inflicted knife wounds and trying to cover it up as a murder. Those were some of the bigger pieces, and they couldn't rebut it. They were like, damn. But they were angry. They were upset.
Yeah, that's crazy. So Henry Rathbone, I was gonna get to Lincoln in the middle of the conversation, but we'll just talk about it now. Can you give us a flyby of who he was?
Yeah, Henry Rathbone was a Civil War, I guess you could say, vet at this point in time, and he was actually the 3rd person on the invite list to be there with Lincoln during his visit to Ford's Theater. So the Civil War had ended on April 9th. Robert E. Lee surrendered to Ulysses S. Grant and Appomattox on April 9th, and they were supposed to be going to, I guess, to celebrate. If you can imagine, I like to tell people, you have to imagine DC was probably in celebratory mood at the moment, you know? Had been a long war, many years, lives lost, and I'm sure people had family on both sides. And so it had to be a huge relief for the war to had been over. And I suppose to kind of wind down and enjoy some of this victory, there was a play, Our American Cousin, was to be had at Ford's Theater. Ulysses S. Grant was supposed to be there next to Abraham Lincoln. And if you look at all the posters leading up, if you go to Ford's Theater, they still have the posters right there advertising Ulysses S. Grant is going to be there with Lincoln. Ulysses S. Grant decides to back out a couple hours prior. And that reminds me a lot of like how Mr. Silverstein, you know, owner of the World Trade Center, who was there every morning, every day, but just on night, he just so happens to get a haircut at just the right time. So the Ulysses S. Grant bailing out a couple hours prior to this is very sus in my opinion. And so then there was another individual, Thomas Eckert, who later became Assistant Secretary of War and was super close to Edwin Stanton, who I view as kind of like the Dick Cheney of the Lincoln era. And he backed out. He also declined. So then the third string was Mr. Henry Rathbone. Mr. Henry Rathbone, allegedly they were chosen because his wife and Mary Todd Lincoln got along. They were good friends. That's one of the reasons that are given as to why they were invited over other people. Because that's one of the things that official historians will often point out is that Ulysses S. Grant, his wife, did not get along with Mary Todd Lincoln, and that's why he pulled out. I don't buy it. You're not going to, I mean, if you're going to bail out, you might as well have done it way before it was announced and put on posters. You don't do it a couple of hours, in my opinion. But yeah, Henry Rathbone's wife, Clara Harris, who was also his stepsister, they were fiancé at this point in time. She really got along with Mary Todd Lincoln, and that's why they were chosen. And I view him as the suspect, as the shooter. You know, the if you've heard anything about the Lincoln assassination, you always hear John Wilkes Booth was a shooter, jumps down, breaks his leg, gets caught 12 days later, end of story. That, in a nutshell, is the Lincoln assassination.
Yeah.
But what draws me to it is when you really start breaking it down and you start looking at the little finer details, none of it makes sense, including the Seward attack, the Seward Mansion attack. That's a massive component to the Lincoln story. And my inspiration is David McGowan. He's the one that led me down this path. And he said he's of the thought that the Seward Mansion attack never took place. And this is key because if the Seward Mansion never took place, then obviously there's more to the story of what happened and transpired at Ford's Theater.
And so Henry Rathbone, did he work for Lincoln? Was he part of his cabinet?
No, he was a military guy. I can't remember if he was a colonel or somewhere along there.
So he was also in the military and he was invited. Yeah, man, Ulysses pulling out that's interesting. And I heard you mention on one of the other podcasts is that like he did it because he wanted to catch the train.
Yeah.
But he didn't get home any earlier if he'd just waited like for the next one, right?
Yeah, so he ended up catching the midnight train to go. The official excuse given is that he wanted to be with his kids that Saturday morning. He caught the midnight train out of town, and people that have looked into the train manifest and the schedules for that time period have noticed that by catching the midnight train, it wasn't a straight shot. There was a layover, I can't remember what town, but there was a long layover, like a 4 or 5 hour layover. So by the time they finally got to New York, if they would have caught the 6 in the morning a.m., they would have only been off by 2 hours instead of having like a 5-6 hour layover somewhere else. You know what I mean? So it makes no sense.
And so why do you think Lincoln's own guys, like his own right-hand men, like his top leaders, why did they want to kill him?
So just like a lot of things, I'm of the mindset, I've never proclaimed to know it definitely was because of this or because of that. I have theories. Some of those theories, I'm of the mindset, you know, like I mentioned David McGowan, he's been passed away for 10 years. And you can find a lot of his work at centerforaninformedamerica.com. which was a play on words for CIA. And he passed away. He died of like basically turbo cancer shortly, and he was diagnosed shortly after he exposed the Boston Marathon bombing. He did an exquisite expose, and I don't know where you're going to be posting this, so it might not be safe to really talk about it too much. But if anyone wants to watch that 4-hour podcast that David McGowan did, I do have it on my Odyssey channel. If you go to my Odyssey channel, there's a search tab. Just put in David McGowan, all the things related to David McGowan, including a moon landing book. He wrote the book Wagging the Moon Doggy, which in my opinion is one, if you don't believe the moon landings, that is one of the best books out there, but hands down. But David McGowan was a former journalist and super inquisitive guy. And what I learned from him is if you find big holes in some of these stories early on, why should you just freely accept everything else? You really then have to start questioning everything else. That's what he did with the Boston Marathon bombing and so many of these other events. And I'm sorry, I got a little sidetracked. What was
No,
your
you're good.
question?
You introduced him, but like, cause he introduced you to the Lincoln assassination. But like, why do you think? Because it makes sense. Like, if Southerners, like, Southerners want to kill Lincoln to keep the war effort going. But like, why did those in the North on Lincoln's own team? Why did they want to kill him?
I got you. So much like I'm of the same mindset of David McGowan that. We have this fake left-right divide. And I say it's fake. It's real. There are liberals. There are Christian conservatives. That's real. But the divisions to put us against each other are nonsense because the same agendas get pushed through no matter who's president. Doesn't matter if it's Joe Biden is behind president. Israel's still going to be doing their thing in Gaza. Now we have Trump. Nothing's changed. The same agendas in the background still go through. Some people may disagree with that, and that's fine. But that's how I view it, and that's how I see things. And that's how Dave McGowan viewed it. So if we go back to this time period, yeah, we had the North and the South, one of the bloodiest war in our nation's history. But there was money being made by figures up top, the elites down south, the elite up in the North. One of my theories is Lincoln, although I do view him as a tyrant, there were many things that I vehemently disagreed with. There were some things that he was trying to change a little bit. He had plans to, the war, people had already been thinking that the war was going to be winding down towards the North's favor months before it officially ended. And Lincoln had been planning on taking it easy on the South, not being so hard. A lot of the radical Republicans wanted to punish the South. And by having Lincoln at the helm, that was not going to happen. Now, what happened after Vice President Andrew Johnson got put in? A rather notorious Reconstruction period took over. So that's exactly what ended up happening. And so that's a very, very plausible theory. This whole theory that it was a Confederate plot holds really no water. The war had already been over. Why kill Lincoln? The South had to know that was all of the repercussions were going to fall back upon them, which ended up happening anyways. So there was no reason for it. And then when you look at the Masonic connections, there was Masons on both sides, on the North and the South. John Wilkes Booth was a Mason. Edwin Stanton was a Mason. That's another key aspect to it. I view Booth somewhat of a Lee Harvey Oswald type, a Muhammad Atta. These were just figures to leave some kind of a paper trail, to leave a narrative that you can go with. You know what I mean? But like I mentioned at the very beginning, when you really dig into the finer details, none of the story makes any sense.
The one-shot Derringer, that one doesn't make any sense. The fact that John Wilkes Booth would use a gun that only has one bullet, carries one round. What if you missed?
What if you missed? What if the guard that was supposed to be guarding the entry, instead of going downstairs to get drunk, actually decided to stay his post? So it's not just what about missing. It's all these little things. This is what I mean. It's not just one thing. Oh, you're making a big deal out of one thing. No, I can list you problem after problem after problem with the story. Other issues with the story is, for all these big parts to what we are sold as the official story, there are 2 to 3 different versions to it. John Wilkes Booth, a lot of people, through the stories and what you grew up hearing, is that he broke his leg when he jumped down from the box down onto the stage. That's, I guess, if you want to call it the consensus. But that's what John Wilkes Booth said in his diary. in order to make him seem more like a boss. I broke my leg, and I don't even think I have questions whether he wrote all those entries or anything on those entries on the Booth Diary, for the simple reason that the FBI did a forensics analysis in the 70s. They found so much tamperings, pages glued on and ripped out. How much of the Booth Diary can we take at face value as well? The other part to the breaking of the leg, other people believe that Wilkes Booth probably more than likely broke his leg later on when he escaped, when his horse fell upon him. That sounds a lot more realistic. I went to, like I mentioned at the very beginning, I went to DC. I sat in Ford's Theater. I'm 43 years old. I could make the damn jump and not break my leg.
It's not very high.
It's high, but you're not going to break your leg.
Okay.
And from what we understand, Booth was 26, 27, super athletic, young actor. And that's why I mentioned I'm 43. If I could make it, I don't see why a young athletic man couldn't.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But so I've read the book by Timothy S. Good. It's called We Saw Lincoln Shot. And it features 100 testimonies from people that were allegedly there at Ford's Theater. And it's interesting how there's really no witnesses to what happened inside the box at Ford's Theater. So what we have to go on is Henry Rathbone's deposition. He was the only one deposed. Mary Todd Lincoln was in the box. Clara Harris, his stepsister fiancée, Clara Harris, was also in the box, but none of those gave depositions. We only have one deposition. That's Henry Rathbone's. The people that were in the theater, some say they heard the discharge of a gun. Others say they didn't hear anything at all. The interesting thing that you get from reading these alleged testimonies is how a lot of them say that they didn't even know what was going on. They thought it was part of the play, which I find rather interesting. When I hear that, in today's lens, if something doesn't look real, I'm like, that looks fake. I don't know how you feel about the Trump assassination attempt, but I viewed that as soon as I saw it. I'm like, man, this doesn't look natural. The reactions in the crowd, the reactions by President Trump, nothing looked natural at all. And then when he turned his head at at just the right moment, in Trump's case, because I had gone down the Lincoln rabbit hole, it brought back Lincoln memories, because Lincoln turned his head at the wrong moment, and that's how Wilkes Booth was able to get that lethal shot. I don't know if you caught that in any of the shows. So Lincoln was sat in that presidential box, and he was closest to the door. His left ear was closest to the wall. The proceedings on the stage were that way to the right, okay? We're told that the fatal gunshot, came through his left ear and lodged under his right eye. So think about that. If you're a right-hander, which Booth was, and you're holding a one-shot Derringer, that's a funky-looking shot. Your wrist is going to be turned around to make that shot.
So he was seated to his left, to Lincoln's left.
Who was seated?
The shooter. The shooter was
John Wilkes Booth came from behind.
Okay, that's the story, that he came from behind. Okay.
Yeah, and Lincoln was sitting next to the left-hand wall. His left ear was next to the left-hand wall. So right there. We are told the shot came from the back of the left ear and lodged under his right eye. So boom. So picture that. Close your eyes, picture that. How do you make a shot? Your wrist is literally turning like that. So what historians have said happened was Lincoln turned his head at the wrong moment, and that enabled the death shot. So you see what I'm saying? He turned his head at the wrong moment. So that's why when I hear the Trump story, he turned his head at just the right moment, he survived. I start laughing because with a lot of these historical events, a lot of these questionable events, a lot of these conspiratorial events, you start to see overlap. You start to see many, many similarities. In the Epstein stuff, the cameras didn't work. They just conveniently went down.
Yeah.
In the Lincoln assassination, the telegraph lines went down for a couple of hours. And there are even reports that the lights, they used gas lights at that point in time period. A gas line went out. So, yeah.
From the witness's perspective, I can understand why you're there to see a show, right? Like you're there, you want to be entertained, and, a noise happens, and all of a sudden you're just like, wait, what? And so I could see how they thought, maybe is this part of the show? Because I've been out in public, and I've seen street performers, right? Who maybe 10 seconds before, you didn't know they were going to be performing something. And so you think maybe this is all just part of some performance, right? Like, I've been at shows where, like, the dude standing next to me ends up going in and jumping and doing some, like, acrobatics. I don't know if you've ever been to, like, Central Park or anything like that where, like, people are, like, doing these street performances. But sometimes somebody I didn't know who was a part of the show ends up coming out of the crowd and being a part of the show. Like, I'm also remember, if you go back to the shooting in Colorado, I think it was in Boulder, where they were doing a screening of Batman Begins. This was one of the first ones, I think. And some of the witnesses were there. They were saying, like, the shooter got up and they thought it was a part of the show as well. Like, they were just like, because he was like dressed in some sort of costume, I think.
Yeah, like the Joker, I believe.
Yeah, and so I think maybe it's like our first instinct to think like, well, this can't be some like murderer, right? Like, so because you're trying to rationalize why you've departed from like the normal course of events. Like, you're trying to think like, why? What is that noise? What is this? And then you soon find out it had nothing to do with the original event, which I've never been in that type of situation. But I don't think it's a far leap for me to think, for some of those testimonies that say we thought it was a part of the show, that actually kind of lines up with my understanding of like just how an average person might try to explain like an anomaly in real time.
I get you. I completely get where you're coming from. The problem is when we look at the story, going back to the story, Mary Todd Lincoln was in that box.
Yeah.
And so was Clara Harris. And none of them screamed, none of them yelled, which is weird.
Yeah.
None of the witness heard them make any sound. If we focus on Henry Rathbone's deposition of the events, which, again, the wild part is that in no less than 3 occasions, he pretty much verbatim says the same thing over and over and over again, like a memorized script. And in his version of events, he's talking about, you know, their whole seating arrangements in that box, and he just heard the gunshot, and then he seen a cloud of smoke come through, and he heard who he later describes as John Wilkes Booth. That was the other thing with the witness. Very few people identified John Wilkes Booth. It's become, we've heard it so many times that, oh yeah, it was definitely John Wilkes Booth. It was definitely John Wilkes Booth. One thing that I don't think I keep forgetting, but I'll bring it up now to bring up, is during the trial of the co-conspirators, they were shown the picture of Edwin Booth, John Wilkes Booth's brother. So all these alleged witnesses that said it was John Wilkes Booth were actually identifying Edwin Booth as the shooter, because they were being shown that picture and they were saying, oh yeah, that was him. That was the guy that was at the theater. So none of it makes any sense. And again, going back to Henry Rathbone's version of events, Wilkes Booth shoots him and then yells, according to Rathbone, says, "Freedom," shoots Lincoln in the head. It's just comical to me. I don't know. The more I think about it, shoots him in the head, says "Freedom." And then Henry Rathbone, that's when he makes a lunge towards John Wilkes Booth. Like he's going to start grappling with him. And John Wilkes Booth takes out the 10-inch Bowie knife and starts slashing at him. Allegedly cuts Henry Rathbone in between the shoulder and the elbow, so around the bicep area. Takes a big gash, several inches deep, allegedly. That's when Wilkes Booth gets on top of the front of the box, the presidential box, and that's when he leaps down. And some of the witnesses says that he kind of like staggers a little bit and then stands up, holds a bloodless knife up there, which is weird. Why would you, I mean, he just stabbed someone. Shouldn't it have some blood or something? But he holds a bloodless knife up, and that's where some people say he yelled "Sic Semper Tyrannis." Others say he said "the South is avenged." Others say he said nothing at all. So there is no consensus even with that part of the story. This is what I mean with so many of these moving parts. It's almost like the official story that you hear, that you know, it's just a bunch of stuff that whoever's telling you to tell, this is the version that they want you to hear. This is what I think happened. But when you break it down, all these pieces have 2-3 different versions of it. So how do we know which one is the real version? Mm-hmm. You know, they're just cherry picking the story that they want. That's another part that people don't fully understand or accept to it. So then Booth gives this theatrical speech. It's quiet in the theater. No one's yelling, no one's screaming. Absolutely no one. There was a couple of thousand people in there. much of them were probably armed. You have to imagine most of the people in the audience were probably veterans. This is the 1800s. It's not like today's where leave your guns, no guns allowed. No, you're talking about a packed theater with military vets all around. So we're to believe that Booth jumped down, gives this theatrical speech, and then sprints out with a broken leg to his horse and gets away. I don't believe any of it, man.
Yeah, the people
He's
were
allowed
most
to
likely
escape and preach,
I didn't think of the fact that there would probably be a lot of military officers with their sidearms. Everybody was carrying a gun in the 1800s.
It was the Wild West, man.
Yeah.
These are the Wild West days. So it's you. I think to understand where I'm coming from and why I don't believe the official stories, you have to take yourself out of today's time period. It was a different time. How many times have I heard people like with the co-conspirators involved in the Lincoln assassination? Oh, I'm glad that Mary Surratt got hung. I'm glad that these guys all got hung. They'll say that. And then you start talking about the corruption and how people, illegal searches were happening. And some people think police are corrupt today. It was a lot worse back then. And so you're going to trust their ways of finding these pieces of evidence. That's the other thing with the pieces of evidence against Booth. Booth allegedly went to Ford Theater, left some ID cards there. When he crossed the bridge to get away, left some ID cards there. He's leaving breadcrumbs everywhere. This is what I mean. It's like he's the Muhammad Atta or Lee Harvey Oswald, just leaving little pieces. Oh yeah, I was definitely here. I don't know if you listened to any of my 9/11 stories, but I told you I live out here in Sarasota. This is where Muhammad Atta, the alleged ringleader of 9/11, lived. And one of the fascinating stories to it all is how before they headed out to board these planes, allegedly, Muhammad Atta went to take his rental car. They had to have a rental car while they lived out here for months. So when they took their rental car out, and this was documented by Daniel Hopsiker, awesome researcher that passed away a couple years ago. He was boots on the ground. He interviewed Muhammad Atta's girlfriend and Lord, everyone connected, the person that rented their car. And the rental agency said, one of the things that has never made sense was how when Muhammad Atta came to return the car, they left. And then about 45 minutes later, they returned. And they wanted to redo the paperwork because they had put the wrong names on the paperwork. They had to have these hijackers as the guys that rented the car. I mean, think about it. I don't think it takes too much. Why would you have to do that? If you're going on a quote-unquote suicide mission, why would you care about these little details unless you are leaving a narrative, a paper trail? This is what we want to leave. And this is what happened with the Lincoln assassination. Yeah, John Wilkes Booth leaving calling cards. Calling cards were like little ID cards back then. Left allegedly Andrew Johnson, Vice President Andrew Johnson, was to be assassinated as well by George Atzerodt. And John Wilkes Booth, or Vice President Johnson, was staying at the Kirkwood Hotel. And John Wilkes Booth, early in the day, goes to check in, to see if Vice President Johnson was in his room, to have him assassinated at the same time. And he left some calling cards there. So he's just leaving calling cards. Here we go. I'm here. I have a hard time believing that. Unless you're trying to set up a narrative, here's your little storyline, and we're just going to sprinkle little pieces of evidence here and there.
Yeah. Man, so if anybody really wants to go deep, you've done a series on this, right? So because we just scratched the surface from some of the things that you've talked about. So where could people go listen to your like extended podcasts on Lincoln?
So I apologize, man. The thing is, it's hard to talk about the whole thing in just like 2 hours, even 4 hours. I have a hard time. I feel some of my better episodes. I did a 2-part series with Monica Perez, and I put those on my podcast player. If you go to my Odyssey channel as well, I do have a Lincoln assassination playlist where anytime I've talked about Lincoln or that era in particular, I have over 10, 13 videos, and each one's over 2-3 hours long. So tons of content for anyone that's a history buff, if you will. I also voiced over the Lincoln Assassination book by David McGowan. That's on there as well. It's about 5 hours long, I believe. Took me much longer, obviously, to do. And I did have a couple of mistakes. I had a couple of mispronunciations with the names and some words, which hopefully down the road I'll have time to clean up. So just keep that in mind. But that book by David McGowan is what inspired me to go deeper and deeper. A lot of things that David McGowan proposes, he doesn't outright say that Henry Rathbone was the shooter. He doesn't outright say it, but the way he lays down his case, that's the only logical conclusion that you can reach after listening to all the pieces of evidence. So there's that. I've also expanded on David McGowan's findings, briefly. Well, I don't know if you were trying to wrap things up or if you wanted me to touch
No,
on them.
I was going to change subjects because I had other things I wanted to get to.
Yeah.
But because I'm a terrible host, I kind of did this out of order. I wanted to introduce you and then talk about Lincoln a little bit. But if we could go back and do that. So like Weezy, you got the What is Truth podcast. You've been podcasting for several years now, right?
Yeah, 2019 is when I first started.
Cool. What I wanted to ask you is like, and I think you kind of alluded to this a little bit, is like reading David McGowan's book, but a lot of people who are interested in researching and education and reading, they can usually point to a moment where they had like an awakening process where they can look back at their life and they say, this was a time in my life where I just didn't care about learning. I didn't care about understanding the world deeper around me. Was there a moment for you where, or maybe a book or a person where you can kind of trace back to like your like awakening process of like, here's where or have you kind of always been that way?
So I'm going to say something. I looked at some of your content, and so you probably won't agree with what I'm going to say. And maybe some listeners won't. And I don't say this to offend anyone, but for me, I grew up very religious, very religious. My parents were very devout. My mom passed away a couple years ago, but was super devout. My dad was super devout until his Alzheimer's kicked in. Now he doesn't talk about God at all, but that's all he used to talk about over and over. So I grew up very devout. And in 2013, my brother's wife passed away of cancer. I was already losing my faith, and I was praying and praying and praying, asking for a miracle, man. I didn't want my brother, to raise 3 kids on his own. I was like, that's messed up, man. It's too young for this. And nothing happened. And so the reason I bring this up is because that was my first red pill. Because initially I was angry with this higher power that I called God. I was angry. I was mad. It's like, how could you let this happen? Then after, I want to say about a week, I don't know when it was, about a week later, calmness came over me. And I go, maybe I'm getting mad at something that really doesn't exist. And so I'm only bringing this up because that was my moment. I'm like, man, I've been taught that this was the truth. I've been taught that the Bible was absolute truth. I've been taught that all these things were true and true and true and true. Now, maybe that's not it. And so that turned my world upside down, man. It was like, are you familiar with Plato's allegory of the cave?
A little bit, yeah. He doesn't know where the light's coming from, and he tries to convince all his friends that he's found where the light is.
Well, they're in the cave. Yeah, they're in the cave. This is what inspired the Matrix as well, allegedly. But they're in the cave, and it's these prisoners. They're tied and bound, and they are forced to look at the wall of the cave, which is pitch dark. But every now and then they light some fires from behind them, and so there's these people in the back making rabbit shapes and all these weird shapes. And so that's all these prisoners have known. All these shadows on the wall. That's their reality of what world is. There's shadow rabbits, there's shadow trees. Everything is. That's their reality. They don't know any better. And at one point, one of them manages to escape and leaves out to the cave. And as soon as he emerges out of the cave, he's been in the dark all his entire life. As soon as he pops his head out, it's so bright. His eyes actually hurt. He can't, he's got to close his eyes. Like, his eyes are sensitive, if you can imagine. It's painful. Then after a few days, his eyes start, to acclimate.
Yeah.
And he can now see outside. Now he sees a real life rabbit. He's like, whoa, the heck? I thought this thing was a shadow. This is what a real rabbit looks like. And so now his perception on reality has changed. And so it's a powerful allegory that allegedly was told thousands of years ago, by Plato. And so for me, that moment right there was my first red pill. And even so, that was the first step. And I grew up as a lefty guy that watched Rachel Maddow religiously. Everything that came on to MSNBC, I believed and bought. That is the truth. I'm not proud of it. That's how I viewed the world. Anything Republicans or conservatives said was dead wrong. These guys are idiots. They still believe in mythology, blah, blah, blah. And that's how I dismissed them. That's how my brain worked. That's how I had been programmed to think of the other side. And when I moved to Florida, which is essentially the South, I was worried that there was going to be racism everywhere. Nazis and skinheads everywhere, and that hasn't even been the case. So that helped change my perception of reality. Like, no, yeah, these guys may wave Confederate flags every now and then, but most of them aren't racist, and even the ones that are just mostly ignorant. They don't really fully understand. They didn't grow up with. They've only known that they've grown up in their own cave. You know what I mean? They're with their own shadows, so that's their own reality. That helped change me. And then I think it was an event called the Pulse nightclub shooting that took place in Orlando, Florida, a couple hours from where I live. And I was listening to NPR on the news, and I'm listening to it, and none of the story was making sense. I'm like, and this is me as a normie that did not buy into conspiracies. I'm like, this doesn't make sense. And I'm going in deep. I'm comparing witness statements, police statements. None of it is making sense. I drove up to Orlando. I'm looking at this club. I'm like, wait a minute. You're telling me how many people were here at 5 a.m? And that was my first red pill where I'm like, man, this is all a sham. This was all lies. And that's what made me then go into these other events. 9/11. Like, man, if I was lied to about this, I got to revisit 9/11. 9/11 for me was sacred for the longest time. Mm-hmm. I was a firefighter because of it. When I saw, the videos of the fire department going up the tower, I'm like, man, that is bravery to the max, man. That is boss material. I want to do that. So I joined the fire service. I went to the fire academy in 2008, and I joined the fire service in 2009. I did that for many years out of being inspired from the official 9/11 story. So for me to take a second look at it was wild to me, because I believe I bought hook, line, and sinker every official story and narrative regarding it. There was times where I had questions. I'm like, yeah, that's kind of weird. They found a passport.
Yeah.
But I believe it. I still believed it. You know what I mean? But then as I took a second deeper look, and I'm looking at this with a microscope, I'm like, that doesn't make sense. That doesn't make sense. None of this makes sense. It's all a sham. And same thing with the moon landings. The moon landings, I believed. I thought it, when I was a kid, I thought it would be cool to go into space and jump around and collect some moon rocks. How many young boys don't grow up thinking that? We all think that at some point, I'm assuming. And I was already into questioning official narratives, and I was kind of 50-50. I was like, maybe we did, maybe we didn't, maybe we did, maybe we didn't. And then I took a trip out to Cocoa Beach, down to the Kennedy Space Center, and I saw a replica of the lunar lander. And that was one of those moments where, like, yeah, man, if you put this replica lunar lander outside during a typical Florida storm season or hurricane, that thing would not last. But I am led to believe this thing made it through the rigors of space radiation and all these rigorous elements and came back. Now I'm not. And then I remember hearing one podcast where Neil deGrasse Tyson, the premier astrophysicist of our time, in one episode straight up admit that we have nothing today that can take us back to the moon. We did in the 60s, but not today. And so that made me, wow, like, I want to look into the moon landing even more now. And I have tons of content that I've done on the moon landings. But that's what it is, man. It's been a steady process. It's not like it's been one thing.
Yeah. It's
been one thing to the next. And I'm at the point in time now where some folks view me as an extremist, as radical. And it doesn't offend me, because there's been many times where I've said things or been against, and later on people come around like, oh man, you were right. You were right. So I don't worry about it. What I worry is I go about life now trying to believe in as many true things as possible. And it's getting harder and harder to tell, man. We get told lies on a daily basis. I mean, the COVID stuff woke up a lot of people, but look at how many things we were lied to about. As someone that believed in science, I'm not saying I don't believe in science, but science has also become very dogmatic. It comes off as something that is anti-religious, anti-dogma, and yet it does the same things that religious organizations do. You have to believe in these tenets or we will excommunicate you. We will call you an anti-vax. We will call you a denier of this if you don't stick to our dogma, to the way we interpret what we deem as science, which has, in many of these cases, who is funding these scientific projects. And that'll tell you what agendas they're trying to push. So yeah, I'm in this weird place, man, where I don't know. And I guess that's why I chose the name What is Truth. And I love it, man, because I'm all these years doing it. I'm still trying to figure out what truth is.
No, I love that. Yeah, let's talk about Christianity a little bit, because I am curious. You know, when the name of your podcast, What is Truth? The first thing that came to my mind was that it's actually in the Bible. That exact phrase is in the Bible. So for anybody who's not familiar, when Jesus is before Pontius Pilate, he's about to be crucified, and he says that he came to bear witness about the truth. That's why Jesus did, because he's like, are you a king? You know, these Jews, they want to kill you. But tell me, like, who are you? And he says, well, you say I'm a king, but I came to bear witness about the truth. And Pontius Pilate famously says, what is truth? And so did that story in the book of John have anything to do with why you named your podcast what you did?
Absolutely. That right there, even though I no longer believe, and I haven't believed in many years now, that story, that image, you know, I'm a very visual person. I picture that image. I'm like, man, if this really did happen, because I do have questions if it did, but it's a cool story. I mean, here we are sitting there, and Pontius Pilate asks him, what is truth? And way before I even started my podcast, I always thought about that. That's a killer question, man. It sounds simple. What is truth? Oh yeah, I know what truth is. And one of the things I've done with a lot of the guests over the years, I'll ask them, for you, what is truth? And no two people give me the same answers. Everyone has their own answer to it. So for me, it's the simplicity and power behind that little statement. What is truth? You know what I mean? Like simple. Couple words, and yet super profound. And so, yeah, that definitely was the reason for it. That's what inspired the name of the show.
So I'm not gonna like sit here and try to like convince you to be a Christian again or what, but how do you reconcile who Jesus is? So, you know, you can go back in history and you can look at historical events and you know, you can look at like things like Lincoln and look at things like how there's just things that don't line up. But the most famous person to ever walk the earth, right? Every culture, every country around the world, Jesus Christ has affected that culture in some way, shape, or form. Our entire calendar is based on when this man was born. And somebody said something a long time ago. It was like, extraordinary events require extraordinary explanations. And I think the effect and mark that Jesus has left on the earth is an extraordinary event. The fact that this man in the Middle East with 12 followers who were not like cream of the crop educated people, right, has had a bigger impact on human history than anybody. So he affected the world if he were the Son of God. Like whether he was or wasn't, right? He actually had an impact on the world that is so great. His legacy has lasted for thousands of years. Our entire calendar is based on when he was born, and so his impact is as if he were the Son of God. And he also claimed to be the Son of God. Like statistically, doesn't it make most sense that if somebody impacted the world as if he was the Son of God and also claimed to be the Son of God, then maybe he was the Son of God?
So, as I stated, I grew up very religious, and I read the Bible a couple of times. And I'm actually going to try to read the entire Bible, all of it, this year. I've already went back and listened to the Genesis, Exodus, listened to the Gospel of Mark and Matthew, Revelations, Book of Revelations, Book of Joshua, Book of Samuel. So I'm slowly making my way, and maybe I may be able to listen to the entire thing, but this time around I'm listening to it as a non-believer, and it's very different. I'm someone that, so you asked if I've always been inquisitive. That has been my nature. I remember as a kid asking certain religious questions as a young little kid that was taken to church and Sunday school and whatnot, and I would ask some of these questions my mom or dad, and there was times they got upset. They would say, Satan is talking to you. You can't be asking those kind of questions. And I'm a little kid, like one of those things was, I remember, I'm trying to think some of the more, now that I'm older, I'm like, man, I was asking some pretty deep questions as a little kid. I could see why my parents would get mad, but I would ask, like, we talking about the talking snake in the Garden of Eden, and as a little kid, I've always loved animals. I'm like, how come God doesn't make any more talking animals? Like that snake was talking in Genesis and converted. And then the other question I asked, like, why did God make a tree that would tempt Adam and Eve to begin with? Like, he should have just let them chill, like, don't even tempt them. And then I realize people now will say free will and stuff. I'm very hardline these days with certain explanations, because I've listened to all the apologetics on a lot of these hard to swallow religious passages. There's a reason why there's a children's Bible. There's some parts in the Bible that kids of a certain age should not be reading. There's a story of Onan, God killing Onan because he spilled his seed on the ground, for example. And there's another story in Genesis of a rapist that is the good guy in that story. And so there's many, 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 many of these hard to swallow passages in the Bible, and that's what started me questioning and everything else. I'm like, man, I can't just blindly accept this anymore. You know what I mean? And so going back to Jesus, figure that is typically given as the contemporary source to talk about the historicity of Jesus is Josephus. Josephus is a very polemic figure. Some people view him as a traitor to the Jews. I don't know if you know much of Josephus.
He was a Jewish historian.
For
That's
the
about as much as I know. Yeah, and he's
his story is fascinating, man. Super fascinating. Because he was a very intelligent Jewish guy back in that time period. So the Jews, there was different sects, during Jesus' time. There was the Pharisees, the Sadducees, different sects. Some were more violent, warlike sects of Jews. Then there was other Jews that were more strictly, they adhered to the Torah. And then there was some that were just more passive, like, all right, if the government wants to do that, we'll just roll with it. So there was different strains of it. Josephus was raised pretty in well-to-do means in Rome, and he was super intelligent. He knew, because he had worked with the Romans, alongside the Romans for so many years, he knew that none of the Jewish sects had any chance against the Roman Empire. Like, trying to start stuff with the Roman Empire is just suicidal. You got to work with the Romans. This is how Josephus, and that's why some people view him as a traitor, because he betrayed his own people and whatnot. Some people would argue he was just using his smarts. It's stupid. Why are you fighting against the machine? Rome is already here in Judea. We're not going to do anything about it. And so a lot of people, he writes a couple of lines regarding Jesus, but he wasn't a contemporary of Jesus. He wrote these decades after the alleged Jesus story. We talked about the Lincoln stuff. Look how many holes this event happened 160 years ago, and none of the story makes sense. It falls apart here, falls apart here, falls apart here. But yet, when it comes to the Gospels, people will accept. There are people, I don't know if you are of this brand of Christianity, but there are some Christian folks that will take line by line. This is exactly what happened. This is exactly how it was said. And the translation that I have received from some of these languages that are now extinct are as close to the original translation as possible, and they accept it. They wholeheartedly accept it. I'm like, you don't have any questions? You don't think maybe this is a little bit wrong? I speak Spanish. There are times where I can hear a joke in Spanish, and I try to tell it in English, and it doesn't have the same punch. It's missing so much texture, so much nuance to it, and vice versa. If there was a joke in English and I'm trying to explain it in Spanish, it's not going to hit the same. And so my point is, with the Bible that we have today, in today's climate, how much of it is actually as close to the original writings? So there's that issue. The other issue is there were so many other texts and scrolls. For example, the Gospel of James, I listened to the Gospel of James the other day. Beautiful text, but it talks more of a mystic Jesus. And this is probably why it didn't make the cut. So how did these people, during the Council of Nicaea, there was also a Council of Carthage and whatnot, who made them the arbiters to decide what text could make it into the Bible, into the final cut, and which ones couldn't? Because there were so many that didn't make it. Why did you exclude those? And so the more I look into that, even though I don't believe I'm profoundly interested in it. It's amazing to me because it helps me understand today's climate, the way people talk about end times today. Now that I've read Revelation, it makes more sense. I'm like, all right, I could see why this guy's saying this because I've listened to it. But it's so interesting to me that I've just been trying to get deeper and deeper to the origins of it all. Who were the first people telling these stories? And when you look at Genesis, listening to Genesis again over with a fresh new lens, and God is talking about how in several passages how I was known as Elohim, El Shaddai. Those are gods from the old Canaanite religion. The name El is the head god of the Canaanite religion. The Canaanites had preceded the Israelites by centuries, if not more. Then you go back to the Epic of Gilgamesh. These stories were written on clay tablets as far back as 2,700 years. So almost 1,000 years older than the Bible itself. And I don't know if you are familiar with the Epic of Gilgamesh, but the flood story in there, even the way one of the gods makes humanity, she takes clay and forms humans. So I start going back and back, and because that's in my nature. I want to know the origins. Where did, this didn't just start here and then everything took off from there. Everything has origins. Where are the origins to all of this? And so it's in this quest that I've been going down that I'm like, man. And so the further I dig, the more I enjoy the stories, but I just don't believe them at all. I believe my mindset, and you could disagree with this, but my mindset is now looking at it is that religious thought as well as government thought, they're tools to control people, control populations. There's a great book by Larkin Rose called, what is it? Government Authority, or I think it's called The Biggest Superstition. And it's talking about the belief in government authority. People, we get raised to believe that we have to trust in government authority. The government tells us this is the way it is. We have to accept it. That's gospel. That's fact. We can't deviate it. But in reality, it's nonsense. It's not real. Make it. We bend to it, but when it's not real, this country allegedly was founded on taxation is theft was one of the cries that we are told, right? Taxation is theft. And yet I'm working 60, 80 hours a week. I look at my checks and I see how much I'm getting taxed every dang week. I thought taxation was theft, and this country has been doing this to each and one of us for centuries. So this whole myth, again, it's a myth that this country was founded on these particular principles. It's all nonsense, man. We're told to respect the Constitution and all this, and it's constantly getting trampled upon. It was trampled upon during Lincoln's time in the 1860s. It's being trampled upon today. It's all mythology. So this is the way my mind view or my worldview is, that whether it's religious organizations or governments, they're just pushing these myths to have us living in fear. The
Can
way
I
I
ask
look.
A question?
Yeah, man, I'm sorry. I got
No,
on
you're
my
good.
high horse.
No, I appreciate that. That's a good backdrop to have. But you said you'd like to, understand origins. Do you believe you have a soul?
I don't know anymore, man. I used to think that, and what has made me answer you as I don't know anymore, my dad's Alzheimer's. Because if you've had any loved ones that has Alzheimer's, it sucks, man.
Yeah.
I had heard people getting Alzheimer's, but I didn't know these people that good. But now it's my dad, and he raised me. I know, you have a relationship with your dad. We know our dad. And when I talk to my dad and I'm looking at him, I'm sitting across from him, looking at him in the eyes. I'm trying to see if there's a soul in him, and I don't feel it. So I don't know. I don't know if we have souls or not. Maybe I've been thinking about it a lot. So that's a good question, because I've been pondering and musing about it. What if soul is simply our consciousness?
Well,
And what is consciousness? Are they intertwined, or are they two separate, different things?
I'm really sorry to hear about your dad. And I don't know anybody with Alzheimer's right now, but I have relatives who've had relatives, and my grandfather, he had Alzheimer's, and I think that's ultimately what took him, and it's, our bodies are frail, our bodies are fragile. And I've done some reading about like the causes of Alzheimer's and just what can lead to the degeneration of the brain. That's where it starts. And so there's a bunch of hypotheses, but that's not really the point. But I was reading a story about a man who had hydrocephalus, and he didn't know it. And his brain was like the size of a grape, and this guy was like 40 years old, married with kids. But like, dude, he just didn't really have a brain. Like, how I don't know how you can really explain that without like where does consciousness come from? And so like there's
Yeah.
so much mystery to the human experience. Like, why are we here? Like that's ultimately what religion I think wants to answer that question is like, why are we here? Who created the universe or what created the universe? And then perhaps most importantly is like what happens to us when we die? We have this feeling that there is like our bodies and our physical nature, but there's also like this experience where we feel spiritual realities very deep. Like, and so there's a part of me, at least this is my experience, that like I feel like there's a part of me that is separate from my body, you know, and that I have a soul, and that something is is going to carry on beyond death. Because as I look around the world, man, like there's just no way this all happened as an accident. You look at like the vastness of space and the planets, and just like how you can look at like a piece of grass under a microscope or look at a cell and it's irreducibly complex. Like there has to be an explanation for why all of this exists.
Or maybe not. And that's where we sometimes get hung up on.
Well, I don't say
Maybe,
that we have to have a
yeah.
perfect understanding of the explanation, but we at least have to admit that it started somewhere. It started. It had to have.
Yeah. And so when people say God created everything, my quick, because I'm in this weird thing with everything, man. I don't believe, so people, because I don't believe the creation story, people, oh, you believe in the Big Bang? Something came out of nothing. No, I don't believe that either. I don't believe any of this. Maybe it's something that we will probably never know, man.
Mm.
It's just incomprehensible. And so I've been reading and learning more about these ancient philosophers. And
I listened
one
to
of
your
them,
episode on Seneca, by the way. That was really good.
yeah.
I started listening to Seneca.
What do you think about his writings? His writings are on point,
Man,
right?
I'm on like halfway through, and
Yeah.
yeah, there's just I feel like it's food for my soul.
Yeah, I
You
love it,
know?
man. And they were going to add some of his writings to the Bible. Those
Mm.
were, remember I was telling you about what books made the cut? His writings were in consideration. Think
Which
about that.
that's not something I've looked at.
Yeah.
I haven't
Look
fact
into it, man.
checked that, but I'll look into it. I trust
Yeah.
you, but I know that the canon of scripture, like what was left in and what was left out, um, like it's tough. Like there's some things where I'm like, man, like what if we found a book of the Bible today, right? Like, and hypothetical here, we could be 100% certain that it was written by the Apostle Paul, or 100% certain it was written by John, or even Jesus, right? Like, let's just say hypothetically we could verify that. There's people who say that like it would be of no importance in that it would not be, it wouldn't, we should not add it to the Bible. And I'll be honest, like that kind of bothers me a little bit because that if we uncovered a text out in the middle of the desert, I'd be like, well, what the heck does it say? Right? Like what what does it
It goes
say?
back to that rigid thinking.
Yeah.
This is what I mean with a lot of people. It's just
Yeah.
rigidity.
And
And
I
yeah.
think why some people would be hesitant is because the Bible, we talk about like biblical sufficiency. Like the Bible is perfectly sufficient, but that doesn't mean it's exhaustive. So you have the creation story. That's not an exhaustive story, right? Obviously, because we don't know what happened in all the details, right? But like it's a summary. So summaries are not usually exhaustive. And so I can actually reconcile with that. Like I don't know all the details. I don't know how God took dust of the earth and made a human being, but I'm assuming if God is he created a universe, he can create a man, or so having a scientific explanation of how these compounds in the ground turned into human flesh, like I don't think you have to scientifically prove that that's possible because or exhaustively explain it. I think you can take a summary, which that's what the creation story pretty much is. It's a summary, and we should not look for exhaustive explanations where the written text never intended to do that. Like we talk about like chronologically, what's the word? the chronology of the Bible, in Genesis, you have some of those really long segments where it's like this person begat this person and this person begat this person and this was the father of so-and-so. Like, I think it's entirely possible that that's not an exhaustive list either, right? Some people will cite the age of the earth as being like 6,000 years old or something like that. Well, if you are going based off of those numbers and people's ages and when this person was born and that person was born, sure, you can get that. But that section was also not written for the express purpose of keeping a genealogical record. It was written for a particular people at a particular time that had background knowledge. And so they didn't need exhaustive lists. And so I think it's entirely possible that, there's some generations in there that are skipped. And so it's a much longer lineage than what's actually recorded. You have other things that are listed, but they're not exhaustive. And so just want to make that point.
Yeah, and I understand that. I, I've been I also read Homer's Odyssey.
Mm-hmm.
Fascinating tales, and I say this with all due respect because I know some people will get offended, but I read a lot of these stories like I'm reading the Bible, like mythologies. Maybe there are some grains of truth, just like some of the Greek stories probably had some grains of truth, and then they further expanded upon. So I think I learned a lot from those stories. I was fascinated. I'm learning, reading. I listened to Revelation twice in the last couple of weeks, and the version I'm listening to on YouTube, it's kind of dramatized, so they have voice actors for God and the apostle, and music and and dramatic events. Just it sounds cinematic, but it makes it more immersive. You can actually, instead of just reading some plain text and just reading through it, it makes it funner. For me, at least, it makes it more visual, and I love it. But in the end, I view them as stories for a set of a variety of different reasons. A set of stories to explain try to answer some of the questions you had. Why are we here? How did this whole thing come about? And then ultimately, they are used as control tools. 10% of your tithing, give on to God what is to God, and give on to Caesar what is to Caesar. Things along those lines. And so ultimately, I reject them for those aspects. I don't claim to know how this planet came about. If we go with the religious belief that God was just hanging out for trillions of years in the darkness of space, and then just one day he's like, you know what? Today I'm gonna make the universe. Like, that doesn't make sense. See,
no, but you also have to I get it. If you describe it like that, it's kind of humorous. You're like, why, right? And I guess how I think about that is like you use the word years, right? You said God was just hanging out for trillions of years. Like you have to just get rid of that time of measurement entirely, because like even the concept of time, as we're describing it, we can't apply it to God. Like if something is completely outside of time, like an incomprehensible God, we can't assign figures of time, measurements of time towards God in that way. Like it's beyond our understanding to understand, like, before the creation of the earth, we know that God is perfect, and we know that he was perfectly fulfilled.
How do we know that though? See, now we're getting into the God of the gaps fallacy, because when science can't explain it, or whenever no one else, therefore God. How do we see? To me, that seems like another jump. Yeah. Science does this, and then religious folks do it. Like, therefore God, therefore science, therefore no. Let's not jump there. How did we get there? So we this God creature or thing, guy, woman, who knows? Because every culture has different beliefs in it. It's not. I guess I'm of the way I look at it is God is not a universal truth. There are universal truths out there. Math you can go to China, you can go to Latin America, you can go to Russia. 2 + 2 is going to be 4 no matter where you go. But you talk about God, well, God could be Yahweh or Jehovah, depending on what region of the world you're in, or he could be the Buddha, he could be Muhammad. It just depends on where you're at. It's not a universal truth. And so that's where I see things these days. And so this concept that God is all-encompassing over this, okay, how did you get to that point? How can you verify that?
So, I can't verify it with all the typical tools of science that like one would rely on today. So like, I'll admit there is an aspect of faith in all of this. Is like, I believe the Bible. I believe the Bible is true, right? So for what I was saying earlier before is like, the Bible is not completely exhaustive, but it is sufficient for what we need to know for salvation. Okay, so it's not exhaustive in explaining the creation of the universe, but it is sufficient in telling me what I need to know about God in order for salvation. So setting aside like the exhaustive versus the sufficient part. So like the Bible is sufficient for what it was intended to do. Now, going sort of beyond that, like I think you can make philosophical like reasoning. You can use philosophical reasoning to like understand, okay, we know there was a beginning, right? You can, a lot of astrophysicists will talk about how the universe looks like it's expanding and that it began at a singular point. Okay. So you can make philosophical insights that there was a time where this wasn't here. And so just kind of going off of that, we can kind of go back and forth philosophically about what way it may or may not have existed. And there will be some speculation at that point.
Yeah, I don't think we could ever get, there's times where we will never be able to get absolute truth. That's one of those things we won't be able to. It's kind of, I guess, kind of bringing it back even to the moon landings. I don't believe we have the tools to get back. We were told that in the 60s they built these amazing analog pieces of equipment to get us into space, but we don't have, even though we've made leaps and bounds of technological improvement since the decades, we don't have anything to take us back. And so the only way to be absolutely truth, whether we made it to the moon or not, would be to each of us going up there and being able to verify, oh yeah, maybe we absolutely did, we absolutely didn't.
Yeah.
So because that's not realistic, that's not possible, we then have to look at other pieces to it.
Mm-hmm.
What makes more reasonable sense and what doesn't. And for me, I know you said that for you, scripture fulfills you and it's met. For me, it does nothing of that. In fact, it just makes me more curious as to why people still believe onto these things, especially as I read the Old Testament. It's full of animal sacrifices. You need to make sacrifices to our Lord and just massive sacrifices. You got to cut the animal this way, put the entrails there, like in detail. The Mesoamericans practiced a lot of human sacrifice, and a lot of people will, that's why Jesus came. Well, hold up. Before you look down upon them, the whole pinnacle of the Christian story is the human sacrifice of Jesus. Jesus goes through this crazy crucifixion, lots of pain. And this is one of these questions. It brought me back to when I was a kid. He goes through all this pain. And I remember as a kid, I'm like, okay, well, he's God. He knows he's not going to die. So why do we have to feel bad that he's getting crucified? He probably doesn't even feel the pain. This is me as a little kid thinking this. I'm like, he's going to revive himself in a couple of days. This is what pissed off my parents. Like, no, we have to accept the resurrection story. And they would get mad. And I'm just an inquisitive little kid, man. I was like 18 years old. No, but he's God, right? You're telling me he's God. He knows everything. He knows he's going to die. He even says, one of you guys is going to betray me. Peter, you're going to deny me 3 times before the crow, or before the rooster sings. Mm-hmm. He knows these things. And he knows he's going to resurrect himself. So why is it a big deal? Is it really a sacrifice? And these were fundamental questions that I had as a little kid. And now that I'm older, I'm like, man, those were damn good questions as a little kid. And now I've kind of explored them more, and none of the story makes any sense. For me, at least.
Yeah.
And so I don't want people to take anything like these things back. There could be things that you and I, or anyone listening, we can agree on many, many other things. This could be just one of those big things. One of the things I've been pondering lately is I mentioned David McGowan, and I have huge respect for him. He believes that the Flight 93, with Muhammad Atta, there was something going on. Maybe it did get hijacked. I don't believe in that at all. I believe it was like the Seward Mansion attack, a completely manufactured event. That's a huge disagreement that I have with McGowan. Does that mean I'm going to scrap everything else he has said because of that huge disagreement we have? And James Corbett, in my worldview, he is the king of conspiracy theorists. Out of all the big names out there, he is the least known because I think he's more legit. We've all heard of Alex Jones or David Icke, but I think those guys are all corrupt. James Corbett is the real deal, and that's why he's underground still. He's still highly shadow banned. I've done several shows with James Corbett. I'm going to have him on in the future. But he thinks we made it to the moon. That's a massive disagreement that I have with James Corbett. Does that mean that now I'm going to throw away all his other beliefs? This is one of the things as I've gotten older is you're not going to agree with people 100% on everything, man. You're going to have some big time disagreements. Does that now mean you have to discard everything else? You may naturally, because we're humans, you may naturally, well, he was wrong about that, so how much seriously can we take him on this other thing, you know? And by all means, we should always be doing our homework, always be fact checking, always verifying all these claims and things that we hear. You shouldn't hold anyone in a high pedestal. You shouldn't do your own research, man. I think we're living in an age where people like taking shortcuts for everything. They want to know these high, intricate things in a 60-second TikTok reel and find out the truths of the universe on the 60 seconds. You know what I mean? Like, how do I become enlightened in 5 minutes or less? People are looking for quick little things, when in reality, these could very well be lifelong journeys that we take. You know, this latest philosophical thing that I've learned is Kaizen, Kaizen.
Is that Japanese for
it's what
continual
Toyota
improvement?
used. Yeah, 1% improvements. So it's super simple but powerful philosophy because it kind of relates to what I'm just saying. People, you know, what happens at the end of the new year, you know, or at the end of the year, people for New Year's, oh, I'm going to lose 30 pounds in 2 months. I'm going to be running. I'm going to be doing, you're going balls to the wall, for lack of a better term, trying to lose all that weight. And then after a week, I see here at the gym where I go, I go to the gym as much as I can during the week. And at the very beginning of the year, jam packed. It even sucks because you can't even use any of the machines. Now it's back to what it normally is, just quiet all to myself.
3 weeks, three.
Yeah, but it's because people get burnt out. They want immediate results right away. If they see a 60-second TikTok video, they want the answers to the universe right there in that 60-second clip. That's not what it. You need patience. You need to exercise patience and keep exploring things, even when you think you are absolutely sure about something. Like we started with Lincoln. I've read so many damn books on the subject. Does that mean now I stop? No, I keep reading more. If I hear more Lincoln stuff, I want to consume it. I want to get as much information. Some people will say, well, now you're like somewhat of an expert and whatnot. I guess, but I still feel I can learn so much more. Even though I do know quite a bit about the subject, I don't feel like I'm the end all be all by any stretch of the imagination. I'm still learning. And if I can enhance my theories or maybe I need to maybe I started reaching a certain conclusion. Now I need to scrap it based on this new information that has come in. I need to have my mind be able to have that flexibility. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It kind of reminds me
so
of
rigid.
Kind of reminds me of this quote by, I think it was Newton, like Isaac Newton. He says, you know, a lot of people would compliment him on his intelligence and things like that. And he always said that he never felt like he was but a child who picked up a few stones on the shore of the sea of knowledge. And I think that's kind of like, you picture this beach, right, with all these rocks, like it's just vast. And we're so lucky if we can even just pick up one stone and understand that one thing. But like there's so much that, and I think that's kind of a humbling thing as
It is.
as a man, like, you know, I believe we should be grateful for those, like the Isaac Newtons, and like those are like the examples of the people who like we should all strive to sort of be like. And, you know, like for you, it's David McGowan. Like I have people like who it is for me, but like pursuing knowledge, it's also a really humbling thing because we realize just how much we don't know. It's like that bell curve, right? Like both sides understand that they're retarded, kind of, like, just for a word, like it's only when you like learn so much that you realize you don't know anything. And the people who are just straight up idiots who don't read anything and they don't ever try to learn, like they also would probably be like, hey, I don't really know anything. But it's like everybody in the center who thinks they know things and they think they're smarter than they actually are. But it's like once you've actually achieved like some true knowledge, like it's actually a very humbling thing, because it's like you come over this rim of insight just to see a whole new landscape that you actually have no idea about. So it actually makes you feel smaller. You're like, man, there's so much more. And it's humbling, and like I don't know. I certainly don't think that I've arrived by any stretch of the imagination, but like, and that's part of the reason maybe like I need the Bible. I need that structure. I need that. I look at my life and I'm like, man, I have these questions. How do I reconcile with the fact that like lying, right? Like talk about like moral absolutes. Like why do I feel bad when I lie or when I steal or when I do something? It doesn't sit right. Like, and then you look at like every other culture that's ever existed, like there's a pattern here. Lying
Well,
is
kind
wrong.
of. Stealing. I'm sorry to interrupt you,
Yeah,
but
go ahead.
I listened to the story of Captain Cook. And when he was in the Polynesian islands, Captain Cook was pretty even tempered with a lot of the natives. He
Mhm.
was probably less racist than, a lot of his his crew that when they were exploring the world. He was a little bit more open-minded. But when he went to the Polynesian islands, one of the things that drove him crazy was how the Polynesians would it, it almost for their culture, Sling wasn't viewed in the Western sense as bad, or for all intents and purposes, by most cultures around the world as this supreme bad. It was almost viewed as stealing, based on the accounts that I've been reading in that Polynesian culture at that point in time. It was mostly viewed as like, damn, you were able to pickpocket him. That's cool. High five. Like it was viewed as like a skill set instead of like this evil thing. Oh, man, if you steal, you feel horrible about it. For in their culture, it was most like, wow, that's freaking awesome. And it drove Captain Cook crazy. It pissed them off. Like, these guys just steal. But in their culture, they didn't recognize stealing in the same sense that other people. So even a lot of these things that I only wanted to chime that in. Are
Yeah.
they really absolute truths?
I hear what you're saying, and I've heard of things like that too. I have a friend who he's going to be a missionary, and he reads a lot about like these uncontacted tribal groups. And he was telling me about how something that they honor in their culture is people who can befriend somebody and earn their trust, but then betray them. Like it's actually seen as like a really more like a something to be praised. Like you got him to think of you as like a brother, but then you killed him, and that receives praise. And so like I those are kind of tough to explain, but I think that even at the core there is some semblance of like universal truths. Like you look at like Mesoamerican culture where they would like kill people, right? Like these human sacrifices, and we think, oh, that's so evil, but in their minds they were actually trying to bring about some good for human flourishing,
That's
because
what
they wanted
government.
to affect weather patterns. They thought that maybe sacrificing these people would bless the harvest and therefore people could flourish. And so I think a lot of these things that like, hey, we don't want to steal because we want people to flourish. Hey, we don't murder because we want people to flourish. Well, maybe in their mind, it's like, I befriend somebody and then I betray them. I would bet that you could trace it back to like, they believe it leads to human flourishing. So like, even though it is expressed in a way that's like completely backward, and I believe that's immoral, their moral reasoning probably can trace back to the same reasons why I believe murder is wrong or stealing is wrong. They just have a very confused moral reasoning. You go around and study different cultures. Pretty much every culture believes that murder is wrong. Pretty much. At least the murder of an innocent person. But like what somebody defines as an innocent person can vary. And so I think these moral laws are written upon our souls, and we understand them, even though in some crazy cultures, I don't know if, the word, people get mad that I use the word crazy, but in some of these cultures where things are a little backward, it's just a confused moral reasoning that leads to a very immoral expression of those moral truths. But if you did kind of backtrack it and find the origin, I think you still would find that it's trying to uphold the same thing.
So it's when as you're talking about that, even the Mesoamerican cultures, they were sacrificing people because in some of their beliefs, they were
Yeah.
bringing the sun rise another day
Yeah.
and the harvest and whatnot.
Because it would lead to more human life.
Yeah, supposedly. Now, the way I look at it is that's government and religious teachings that's being taught to the masses to accept this. You know what I mean? And the masses did, by and large, probably accept it. There was probably some people that were atheists or agnostic like me are like, man, this is batshit crazy. Why are we doing this? But you can't. Just like today in some Middle Eastern countries where religious totalitarianism, there have to be one or two dissidents that are like, man, this is stupid, man. But I can't speak about it against this. You know what I mean? But unfortunately, the masses will gravitate to this. And so in a weird way, I'm trying to connect all this to our modern time. You know, we see these false flags, we see these lying about history. Overwhelmingly, most people will accept these narratives. We landed to the moon, killed Lincoln, and blah, blah. Overwhelmingly, people do that. But there will always be those couple dissidents that say, no, I don't believe in that. I don't ascribe to that. And I mean, you talk about how maybe some of the backward stuff, this is what I mean by going back to the roots of the Bible. Like in the story of Joshua, where God is telling them that he's going to be with them to defeat these tribes. And he's going to they have to circle around this town and instill fear in them. I'm like, whoa, this is kind of psychopathic. And on the certain day, the walls are going to come down, the trumpets are going to thing, and then they're going to go in there and slaughter men, women, and children, and even their livestock, and raise the town to the ground. This is God commanding these people to do that. And I'm looking at it now in 2026, and I see a lot of these people that go to church. They go to church on the weekends, and they're probably sitting on a pew, and they're reading their scripture on an iPad, and they probably have some contemporary music playing while they're in service. And I'm not trying to make fun of anyone, but it's just what goes through my mind. I'm like, I wonder how so many of these people that go to these mega churches or nice churches, you know, they drive up in their Lexus and park in the church and then do their tithing and read their scriptures on the tablet. If we were to able to grab them, stick them in a time machine and take them to this part of when the Bible was going on, when people were sacrificing goats and slitting their throats and saying certain chants and talking to the Holy Spirit so it doesn't kill them. And I have a hard time believing that a lot of these people that are contemporary Christians that, in my view, adhere to a liberalized, sanitized version of Judaism, I have a hard time believing that we could transport them to that time and they would be cool with it.
Absolutely.
They would probably look at them as Satanists and who are these barbarian savages? You know what I'm saying?
I'm a Christian. I do not want to go to sleep and be reborn to be a contemporary with Moses.
You know but you see my point though?
But that's not like, I don't think that that's necessarily a good litmus test to see if somebody really believes these things, because like I was born into a completely different context with completely different sensibilities. I was born for a certain time and into a certain age, and like, yeah, like my preferences now, it's like I like to wake up and have my nice warm coffee in the morning with air conditioning and freaking modern heating. Like, I don't want to go live in the middle of the desert, but like I think I can read those stories and read the history and still have an appreciation that like for what God was doing through that epic in history. I'm not troubled with the sacrifices of the Old Testament sacrificial system with like animal sacrifices and things like that. Yeah, I wouldn't want to be covered in blood myself. Like, that's me speaking as somebody who's just born in the 21st century. But like the fact that it happened, it doesn't trouble my spirit at all. And there are difficult things to reconcile, but I think it's just because somebody wouldn't want to be transported back in time and their modern sensibilities wouldn't mesh well with like the culture of the time, because like you could put anybody today back in those times and it would be a massive culture shock.
I guess maybe I didn't make my entire point or state it good. I guess what I'm trying to get at is those belief systems, and I don't mean this in a disrespectful way, are just fully antiquated. You know, the stories have been sanitized and edited to fit the modern age. You know, this is why you like the Old Testament is full of genocide, man. Genocide, and it's God ordering it. And
let's talk about that for a second. Like, who is being genocided?
The Amalekites,
yeah,
the Canaanites, the Jebusites, pretty much a lot of the tribes in that region, because the Hebrew, according to this these scriptures, the Hebrew Israelites were God's chosen people. And if we apply my way of view of looking at the world today, history is always written by the victor. What if the Jebusites were the chosen people? But this is the version that has survived and endured, and therefore it is the truth.
Well, so would you have any problem, so we have to just step back for a second, right? And understand, we as the created have no right to cast, God is God, right? And I know you don't believe in God, but just for a second, if God is the creator and he created all things, and so he has perfect justice, perfect understanding, all powerful, and is the essence of truth, goodness, and beauty, and he has a chosen people that he's going to eventually use them as a vehicle to deliver salvation to the world, right? Because Jesus is going to come through this line of people, and he is giving them the land, but he's also judging these other peoples, right, who would slaughter babies and sacrifice them to Molech, right? That's a very evil thing. And so if God is using one people to bring judgment upon another, and we're reading that, I can't say God is immoral, because where am I even getting my sense of right and wrong, right? Let's just say for hypothetical, there was a community down the street from where you or I live, and this was an immoral people that raped children every day. I don't think you'd have a problem just annihilating them.
But I would spare the women and children. I would feel the children could be rehabilitated. I may be on board with the men, for sure, but I can't fathom any justification for ever killing children at all, ever at all. And the Bible does it continuously.
So, I mean, there's parts that, look, it's hard to square with, but at the end of the day, do we have a higher moral code that we can tell God it's wrong of you to do that? Because it's like when Paul's talking about...
I believe I do.
But what if...
I know it sounds sacrilegious, but I believe my moral code is better.
But what if, and this is to somebody who doesn't believe in God, this might sound crazy, but what if it's actually an act of mercy? The Bible talks about how every tongue, tribe, and nation will worship God. And rather than letting a child come up in that degenerate society and possibly end up becoming a murderer, God wants his people to have nothing to do with that. And he's wiping out evil, and to take foreign wives, possibly, that's one of the reasons why they weren't allowed to take foreign wives, the Israelites, because taking a foreign wife, every time that's happened, you look at Solomon, he took foreign wives, and what happened a few years later, he ends up worshiping their gods, and God is a jealous God where he won't settle for people worshiping anybody else other than him.
Yeah. Yeah, that was another key takeaway that I've been getting. He's constantly, especially in the Exodus, where he constantly has to make the reminder, I am the God that your ancestors prayed upon. Because this is a time period where the more I've studied it, it becomes clear it was a polytheistic religion that came out, and it slowly turned into a monotheistic religion. This is why I mentioned, even in Genesis, God refers to himself, your ancestors knew me as El Shaddai, El Elohim.
Well, so that's just God it's one God, but each different name, it doesn't mean it's a different God.
It is, though, because it's from the Canaanite...
they're using a different word for Elohim refers to the creator God. So in the creation account, you're going to see the word Elohim because it's God as he's creating.
Religion. In the Canaanite religion, that is the top God. And then right below, there's a lesser God named Baal. So it becomes clear, for me at least, that Judaism evolved from the God El, the top, because God was, in the Canaanite religion, they had a pantheon. They had a bunch of different gods and goddesses.
Yeah.
El was the creator God. And then you had Baal, B-A, who was a lesser god, but also had a lot of power. And so it becomes clear, as I've studied this more and more, I've gone super deep, man. It becomes clear that Judaism then merged the god El and the god Baal together. And so, because remember when Moses goes up to that mountain, and
Mount
then he
Sinai?
comes, Mount Sinai to get the commandments, and then when it comes down, what are the people doing? They made an idol, a calf, right? A baby bull. This is what the Canaanites worshipped. So to me, the signs and the clues are all in the Old Testament that these thoughts and beliefs. I know you don't agree with it. I know you you believe in the creation story. I'm just saying, the way I look at it, it becomes quite apparent that these beliefs originated somewhere else. And I'm not saying that they necessarily stole these ideas. They just improved upon and gave their own message. Let me give you a perfect example of this. In Mesoamerica, the Olmecs or the Toltecs were in Mexico City. And we know very little about the Toltecs, but they built there's a massive pyramid. It's called the Pyramid of the Sun in Mexico City.
Yeah, I've been there.
Massive structure. Freaking amazing. Exquisite stuff. But we don't know much about the Toltecs. But it is believed that the god known as the feathered serpent originated with the Toltecs. And then eventually the Aztecs adopted this god and they named him Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent. The Mayans also praised a similar god, a feathered serpent, but they named it in their culture Kukulkan. We also see this with the Greeks and the Romans, where the Greeks were highly influenced by the Egyptian mythology, and then they came up with their own mythos. Then the Romans were like, oh man, these Greeks have some stuff on point. So they borrowed a lot of, this is why a lot of the gods, when you look at Greek and Roman mythology, it's the same god. The Romans gave them a slightly different twist. I think this is a thing that cultures do when they're living in proximity with each other. They're gonna borrow ideas and thoughts from each other. Then some are gonna take certain evolutional paths and come out this way and that way. And I think that's what happened with Judaism. When you study Canaanites, when you study the Sumerians, the Epic of Gilgamesh, you see that the evolution. And this is the product that we see today has been a process of evolution for thousands of years at this point. And I know you disagree with it, but this is where I'm seeing.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate you sharing. You know, there are, how do I want to say this? Because there's kind of a lot.
I'm loving it, by the way, Matthew.
Same here. I appreciate
love these
your time.
Deep conversations.
Yeah,
man.
I think there's always going to be, in every civilization, people trying to explain certain things. I get that you kind of see them all as equal, but one of them has to be true. And you know,
question is, how do you know which one? Well, what if it was the Aztec mythology that was true? What if it was a Greek mythology that was true? What if it was an Indian religion?
I think all of those things, like, I think the fact that there are similarities between them are sort of like pointing to the fact that, like, they're grasping for something that's true. And, like, just because there might be similarities in some of the gods or the explanations, those can just be sort of things that they made their own traditions. You know, but they ultimately kind of might trace back to something like, you know, you were talking about how a lot of world religions talk about a flood, right? Well, maybe that's just because there actually was a flood and they're just kind of coming up with their own explanation and running with it.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah. So, but the Bible, like, I do think it's in a bit of a category of its own in that, like, archaeologically, just the fact that, like, the amount of, like, Homer's Iliad, I think there's only like two original copies or copies of copies. Like, they don't actually have the original copies, and I don't think there's any original copies of some of these Old Testament texts, but, like, we do have copies of copies and then copies of those copies of those copies. And, like, just the amount of ancient texts that exist for the Bible that can be cross-referenced with a lot of, like, the historical events, I do think it matches up a lot better than a lot of these other ones. Again, I'm not going to sit here and say I'm an expert on every world religion, but
then,
I mean, you look at Moses leading his people out of Egypt.
There's no archaeological evidence for that.
No, but there's like what the Bible is talking about.
Even scholars will say, yeah, that could have been a completely manufactured story, the story of the Exodus.
Yeah, I don't have, like,
there's no evidence for it, my man. Like,
no, I think wild. There is. I think, like, there's the pharaohs that are talked about in Genesis were the ones at the time. Ramses. There might not be. I don't know. I don't have all the mental recall right now, right? And I'm not going to pretend that, like, I'm an expert on cross-referencing the Bible text with, like, all of Egyptian history. But, like, I know that there's more connecting the Bible to actual historical events than a lot of these other ones. And that's not like, it's not like Weezy believe because I say I know. Like, there's just a lot of things we got to reconcile with, dude. Yeah. There's
We're trying
so
to
many.
Figure out what is truth, man.
Yeah, but I come back to the person of Jesus. We know he existed. We wouldn't BC and AD if he didn't. There are historic, that's something I can speak a little bit more about. We have like the accounts of Josephus. There's the accounts of Cornelius Tacitus. You have the gospel accounts themselves, which a lot of people like to say you shouldn't be able to use those as authoritative historical texts, but like we have thousands of copies of these manuscripts. And so we know Jesus existed. We know nobody's been able to match like his impact on civilization. And he claimed to be the Son of God. So we have to do something with that. You either have to believe him or you don't. And, coming back to the name of your podcast, What is Truth? I'm reminded of what Jesus said. He said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And his response to Pontius Pilate, actually, I got my Bible right here, so I'm going to open it, is in John 18. It says, everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice. And that's when Pontius Pilate says, what is truth? But everyone who listens to my voice is of the truth. So, and who is truth? I think truth is not necessarily just one thing, but it's a person, and that the purest embodiment is Christ himself. He is the way, the truth, and the life, and nobody comes to the Father except through me. And his life, his testimony, his death and resurrection meet God's demand for perfect justice. Like we were talking about rights and wrongs earlier. It's like, is lying a sin or is it not? Is it right or is it wrong? Like we know, even people who are non-Christians know that lying is wrong. But why? Or that committing murder is wrong, right? Like we've fallen short, we've sinned, and God sent his son to reconcile us to him. And the only thing that could actually meet the demands of his perfect justice, because we've sinned against an eternal God, is Jesus. And so I don't know what you're thinking about all that when I say that, but it's we have to be, I mean, what is it your experience as a man that you're content with yourself, that you're content with, your life and having never sinned? Or like, do you have that sense of justice written in your heart that these things will have to be accounted for? The Bible talks about how Jesus is going to, like, we're going to have to give an account for everything we've done, right? Like, and like, if I examine my life and I look at some of the things I've done, it's like, man, I've really messed up here. Or like, no, like, even my best works are but dirty rags, right? And, I think about death. I think about what's going to happen to me after I die. And, I look at what the Bible says, where it says the wages of sin is death. The wages of sin is death. And I can't make myself clean. It's going to have to come from somebody who's perfect. It's going to have to come from somebody who's perfect and clean and has never sinned. And that is Jesus.
So my thoughts
Yeah. What are your
on
thoughts?
what you just said is, this is a lot of the stuff that my dad was saying prior to his Alzheimer's kicking in. You're going to have to account for the way you're living. And it's just this, and I don't mean this in a derogatory way. This is just the way I hear it and the way my brain processes it. But it's like living in fear. Again, this is why I view both government and religious thought in much a similar light. They both feed you this constant barrage of fear porn to living in fear instead of living life that brings you happiness. Just reading the ancient philosophers, like a Seneca. Seneca wasn't Christian at all. But you read his writings, he was living as good as he could be. Maybe he was a hypocrite, in his real life. Same thing with Marcus Aurelius. Marcus Aurelius' writings are amazing words to live by. But it's entirely possible he didn't live anything the way he wrote about. We're all humans at the end of the day. It's not to crap on anyone. I'm a human. And when I grew up very religious and I still remember feeling shame for, if I wanted to, how do I say this to keep it rated G? If I wanted to explore my self-gratification as a kid, I was meant to feel horrible shame, You need to go to the priest and confess your sins. God is watching you, Or if I saw a woman's beautiful curves, for example, and I caught myself under religious thought, I was like, oh man, my eyes are making me sin. I feel so much guilt. And now, as I'm older and everything, I'm like, nah, man, that's a nice rack. I'm going to enjoy it. I'm not going to feel guilty about this stuff, man. There's bigger things to worry about. There's kids getting killed on a daily basis in Palestine, but I'm supposed to feel guilty because I enjoyed a nice pair of racks. You know, like, it's like people's priorities are all over the place. And I blame a lot of this on government indoctrination and religious indoctrination. Let's worry about real stuff that's happening. You know what I mean? Let's fix the homeless problem instead of worrying about debating who can go into a bathroom and who can't. You know what I mean? Like, this is the stuff that I worry about. This is my personal ethics. Let's worry about real stuff instead of this stupid, superficial nonsense that we're constantly arguing back and forth about. That's the way I go about my life. And so I don't care if I get judged by this God, if he exists or doesn't. I don't worry about that. I honestly don't care. I'm going to leave behind the best legacy that I can do. I could very well die tomorrow going to work. And I feel, especially the last few years, I've tried to become a better human being. So I would have no regrets. You know what I mean? This is my legacy. This is what it is. You know what I mean? And now that my dad has had Alzheimer's now, you know, officially this year, I've been thinking about him a lot, man, because he was constantly, you need to repent. The end is near. Jesus is coming. He's going to judge. Always, man. Like, it saddened me because I wanted to know my dad. I wanted to ask him stuff about his childhood, and he never opened up, man. It was always Jesus and God, and repent, blah, blah, blah. Always, nonstop. I'm not exaggerating, man. It was extremist. If my dad was an Arab, he would have been a jihadi. He was a Christian extremist, man, like, nonstop. And so for me, I'm like, man, I don't like this extremism. I don't want nothing to do with that, man. I'm gonna live and let live, man. I'm not gonna force my view, my perceptions of morality onto others, man. The way I look at things is, I don't care what you believe. I don't care what they believe or whoever believes. As long as you don't infringe on someone else's well-being, I don't care, man. I honestly don't care. Once you start infringing on another person's well-being, whether that's getting kids to do these stupid procedures and hormones and stuff, now you're infringing on other people's well-being. I'm not cool with that. I don't care, you know, or you're telling your religious beliefs tell you that you need to do this, but it infringes on someone else's well-being. I don't care. I'm not cool with that. That's the way I look at it. But coming back to my dad was at one point a religious zealot. And now with his Alzheimer's, he doesn't talk about God at all. You know, when we first started accepting that dad had Alzheimer's, that was the first dead giveaway. I would talk to him over the phone, and then zero mention of God or the Gospels or repenting or nothing. It's freaking weird. I actually enjoy this conversation with my dad. But that was like the onset. And it's almost like Alzheimer's erased all the hardcore reading of the Bible every day. I don't know if there was a way to tell how many times he read the Bible over his lifetime, how many times over. It was several times over, man. My dad knew he could give you, if you gave a religious quote or, you know, a Bible verse, he would tell you exactly what book and chapter and verse. My dad was that hardcore with it. And now he doesn't talk about it. So as someone that thinks a lot about these things, I've been thinking about my dad. I'm like, damn, this is all he lived for the last several decades of his life. And it sounds harsh, but it's like, it was all for nothing. Now he doesn't. Now you could view it in a different way. I'm just telling you from my perspective. I'm like, all that shunning of family members, he would ostracize and judge other people, push people away. All that shit was for nothing now, because now you're out, your brain is done. So when I look at my dad, my own personal experience with my dad, I'm like, he kind of left a shitty ass legacy with his religious extremism. I don't want to do that. I want to try to be the best person that I can. I'm not perfect by any means, man, but I'm going to try to do things as best as I could, so that if I go, or if my brain goes at one point, people are like, hey, man, at least he was trying to be the best person that he could be. And so that's why I live. That I do it all for legacy, because I don't know, there's no way to know if there's an afterlife or not. Maybe we just go to the ground and the bugs eat us and that's it. And the way we rejuvenate in the next world is through our breakdown of our body and going back into the soil and then coming back into the planet that way. That's possible that religious people don't want to accept, but that could be possible. Maybe there is an afterlife. I don't know, but I don't worry about it, man. I just worry about leaving the best legacy that I can, and that's all. I try to worry about stuff that I can control. I can't worry about things that are out of my control is what I'm trying to get at.
Mm-hmm. No, I definitely appreciate you sharing that story about your dad. I could see how that would shape your view on all of this. I could definitely see that. And yeah, I mean, I think we're all just people at the end of the day, but I don't think we can, like you say, you're trying to live good. It's like, how do you define that? How do you define like the moral reasoning behind that?
Like I just said earlier, by not infringing upon another person's well-being.
But why do you think why do you think infringing upon another person's well-being is not good? Like,
because
like if you were to trace it all the way back, like,
I'm taking away their autonomy. I'm taking away their sovereignty of being what it is to be a human being. That's why, who the hell am I to tell someone that they need to believe this or believe that way or behave this or behave that? If whatever the hell they're doing is not hurting anyone else, whether it's kids or full-grown adults, I don't care. And so I'm not taking away that individual person's sovereignty. You know what I mean? So that to me covers everything, because if you say, well, what about this? Well, is it hurting kids? Then no, I'm not cool with that. Is it hurting that person physically or emotionally or stunting their physical growth or emotional growth in one way? I'm not cool with that. So I feel that way of morality, that works for me. I know you said for you, scripture is what works. For me, living life in this way where I don't care, just as long as I'm not infringing on another person's well-being. Like, for me personally, if I'm on, if I'm somewhere and I see someone struggling, if I can, I'll stop by and help. Why? Because some moral duty. See, my dad used to say, you're going to win points to go to heaven. And I remember thinking, I'm like, I'm not doing this for no goddamn points. I'm doing it because that comes from within me. You know what I mean? I drive up and down these roads all the day. I'm a garbage man. And I probably save several turtles a week. And I'm not doing it because I want people to record myself, like, oh, look at me. Look how cool I am. Put me on on Instagram or Facebook. I saved a turtle. I do it all the week. Why am I doing it? I want to give that little creature an extra day to live. You know what I mean? There's nothing magical. There's nothing fancy about it, man. It's just, that's the way I live life, man. And if I can try to help a creature or a fellow human being, I'm going to take that opportunity to do so. But that's because it comes from within me. That's part of my personality. That's what makes me me.
Weezy, I want to thank you for this conversation, man. It's been really fun.
I loved it.
I'm actually not, for somebody who has a podcast, I don't consider myself well-spoken at all. It's kind of funny.
You did good, man.
Like,
give me a copy and I'll put it on my platforms, man, if we could share it with my folks.
Yeah,
I
we'll
think
do.
Some of the folks will enjoy you, because not everyone that follows me views things. I'm sure there's plenty of people that follow me that are religious, and stuff. And I'm sure there'll be people that really enjoyed you. So you're doing good, man. So
I appreciate it. And best of luck to you, man. And maybe we'll do it again sometime in the future.
Absolutely.
All right, brother. Have a good one.
Yes, sir.